Long before any road cut through the land, before homes rose or names were spoken, the forest was already there. It stood quiet and tall, its trees rooted deep into soil dark with age. Their branches reached toward the sky like open hands, while their roots twisted below, holding stories no one alive could remember. The forest did not speak, yet it listened. It did not move, yet it saw. Time passed through the forest the way wind passed through leaves, soft, steady, and endless. Seasons came and went. Rain soaked the ground, and the sun dried it again. People entered the forest with different hearts. Some came with hope, searching for shelter or food. Others came with fear, running from loss. And some came with desire, carrying dreams that were heavy and sharp like stones. The forest watched them all. It watched hands cut trees for fire. It watched feet stumble through shadows. It watched tears fall into the dirt and disappear. With every step taken, the land remembered. With every secret hidden beneath its roots, the soil grew heavier, not with weight, but with meaning. Old people once said the forest had a memory. They warned that the land never forgot what was taken from it or what was given to it. They said the trees could feel the truth in a man's heart the moment he stepped beneath their shade. But as years passed, people stopped listening. They called such words foolish. They believed the forest was only wood and earth. They were wrong. One night, long ago, something precious was carried into the forest. It was not brought with pride, but with fear. It was hidden not to protect others, but to protect one man from the world. The ground was torn open in silence, and the secret was lowered into the dark. The soil closed again, pressed tight by shaking hands. No one saw. No one heard. Except the forest. The trees leaned close. The roots curled gently around what was buried. The earth accepted it without struggle, the way it accepts all things in time. Above, the leaves whispered softly, as if marking the moment. What was hidden that night did not disappear. It waited. Because the forest does not forget greed. It does not forget fear. And it does not forget the reason something is buried. Men believe secrets stay silent underground. But the forest knows better. What is hidden in darkness has a way of rising again, through roots, through memory, through fate. And when it does, the forest is always watching. The man did not begin his life with greed in his heart. He began it with hunger. As a boy, he learned early what it meant to wait for help that never came. He watched strong men make promises they could not keep and kind faces turn away when times grew hard. Poverty was not just an empty stomach, it was the quiet shame of needing others and being forgotten. Each loss carved something away from him, leaving behind a hard lesson: people could fail you, but effort never would. So he worked. Harder than anyone expected. Before the sun rose, his hands were already busy. Long after others rested, he kept going. His body grew strong, but his heart grew guarded. Each coin he earned felt like proof that he would never have to beg again. Gold became more than money. It became safety. Over time, his fears shaped his thinking. He feared relying on others. He feared kindness, because kindness could disappear. He feared love, because love could leave. Gold asked for nothing. It stayed where it was placed. It did not betray. As his savings grew, so did the walls around him. He spoke less. Smiled less. When neighbors gathered, he stood apart. When family reached out, he answered with distance. He believed that keeping people away meant protecting himself. But isolation has a sound. It is the echo in an empty home. The silence at the table. The long nights where even success feels cold. The community noticed his change. They saw his better clothes, his stronger house, the way he carried himself. Whispers followed him like dust on the road. Some spoke in admiration. Others spoke in envy. No one knew exactly how much he had, but they knew it was more than before. Every look felt like a threat. Every question felt like a trap. He began to see danger everywhere. He locked his doors tighter. He counted his gold again and again, touching it as if to make sure it was real. Instead of comfort, it brought him fear. Instead of freedom, it chained his thoughts. Still, he trusted it more than people. Because gold could not abandon him. Gold could not judge him. Gold did not remind him of old wounds. But the cost was high. He stood alone while life passed around him. Celebrations felt distant. Grief felt private. No one truly knew him anymore, because he allowed no one close enough to try. Deep inside, a quiet truth waited to be faced: the more he trusted gold, the less he trusted himself to survive without it. And when fear finally grew heavier than the walls he built, he began to think of a place no one could reach. A place older than people. A place that kept secrets. The forest. The decision did not come in a moment of anger or excitement. It came quietly, like a slow poison settling into his thoughts. Night after night, the same fear returned to him. He imagined hands reaching through the dark, taking what he had worked his whole life to earn. He imagined doors breaking, trust breaking, and himself standing helpless once again. Gold had given him comfort, but now it also brought fear. He no longer felt safe keeping it near him. Walls seemed thin. Locks felt weak. Even the ground beneath his home felt untrustworthy, as if it could whisper his secret to anyone willing to listen. Every sound made him tense. Every shadow felt like a threat. That was when the forest entered his thoughts. It was old. Quiet. Untouched by people's lies. The forest did not ask questions. It did not betray. It simply stood, holding whatever was given to it. In his mind, it felt stronger than any door or chest. The trees had watched centuries pass. Surely, they could guard his gold better than any human ever could. Before dawn, while the world was still asleep, he prepared. He wrapped the gold carefully in thick cloth, layer upon layer, as if protecting it from both moisture and fate. His hands trembled, not with doubt, but with urgency. This was not just wealth to him, it was proof of survival. Proof that he would never be powerless again. He entered the forest alone. The air was heavy and cold. The path disappeared after only a few steps, swallowed by shadows and roots. Birds were silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the forest was holding its breath. With every step, his heart beat louder in his chest. He chose a place far from any trail, where the trees grew close together and the ground was dark and soft. Kneeling, he began to dig. The soil resisted at first, then slowly gave way. Each strike sent a dull sound into the earth. Sweat ran down his back. His arms ached, but he did not stop. The hole grew deeper, darker, and colder. It felt less like digging and more like opening a wound in the land. When the hole was deep enough, he paused. For a brief moment, doubt touched him. A quiet voice inside asked if this was truly safety, or just another kind of fear. But he pushed the thought away. Trust had failed him before. He would not make that mistake again. He lowered the bundle into the earth. The gold disappeared into the darkness, and with it, a part of him followed. He covered it carefully, packing the soil down with his hands, pressing it firm, sealing it from the world. No mark. No sign. Only memory. As he finished, the forest remained still. Leaves rustled softly above him. Roots rested beneath his feet. It felt as if the land had noticed, not with anger, not with kindness, but with awareness. The forest did not approve or condemn. It simply accepted what was placed within it. He stood and walked away without looking back. But something unseen had already happened. The forest had taken more than gold. It had taken his fear, his secrecy, and his need to control fate. And it held them all, deep beneath its roots, where nothing ever truly disappears. As he left the forest behind, he believed his secret was safe. The forest knew better. Time passed, and the man's life seemed outwardly improved. His home gleamed with order. His gold remained safe beneath the forest floor, untouched, waiting silently. To any observer, he had achieved security. Yet inside, a storm quietly gathered. Peace, he discovered, could not be bought. The gold he had trusted so completely had begun to own him in ways he could not control. Each night, dreams carried him back to the forest. The trees bent closer in shadows, whispering in voices only he could hear. He woke in the cold dark of his bedroom, heart hammering, convinced that someone, or something, had followed him from the woods. He would check the locks on his doors, over and over, counting each bolt, each latch, as if safety could be measured. And still, unease clung to him. During the day, he became suspicious of everyone. Neighbors' laughter felt sharp, their words laced with hidden meaning. A friend's question seemed a trap. Even family visits made him tense, waiting for betrayal behind every smile. He had thought wealth would protect him. Instead, it had built walls around his mind, walls thicker than any fence. The forest called to him in subtle ways. He found himself walking along its edge, watching for the familiar clearing where he had buried his treasure. His hands itched for the soil, his mind restless with the idea of checking, rechecking, confirming. And when he returned home empty-handed, the unease clung even tighter. The gold, he realized with sudden clarity, was no longer a possession, it was a chain. Loneliness began to settle into his bones. Meals were eaten in silence, and sleep brought little comfort. Every success, every coin earned, felt hollow. He had everything the world might envy, and yet he felt as empty as the grave he had dug beneath the forest floor. Trust had become a dangerous luxury, and with it, intimacy and joy had been driven away. Even the forest seemed to change around him. Paths that had once been familiar now seemed twisted, strange. Shadows lingered longer, and the wind carried whispers that felt almost personal. Each visit to the burial site was a test. Sometimes he doubted he could even find it, as though the earth itself remembered his fear and had grown wary of giving up what it had swallowed. The man's paranoia tightened its grip with each passing day. The gold that had promised safety now demanded vigilance. And he obeyed it without question, though the obedience came at a cost. His heart felt heavier with each secret, each locked door, each suspicious glance. What he had thought would protect him had begun to imprison him instead. By now, he understood one cruel truth: the more he tried to control his life, the less control he truly had. The forest, once silent and distant, now hovered in his mind. Its trees seemed to watch, its roots seemed to remember, and its shadows whispered of consequences he could not escape. The cracks in his life were no longer hidden. They were everywhere, stretching through his thoughts, through his relationships, and into the very fabric of his soul. And yet, he could not stop. The gold demanded it. The fear demanded it. The forest, patient and eternal, only waited. It waited for the moment he would see what he had truly buried, not just in the soil, but in his heart. Time has a way of turning small cracks into chasms. The man had convinced himself that gold could shield him from disappointment, from pain, from human failure. Yet the deeper he clutched his wealth, the more the world seemed to punish him, not with thieves or robbers, but with consequences far sharper and far closer to home. It began quietly, with whispers. Neighbors murmured behind closed doors, their voices soft but piercing. Some were curious. Some were envious. And some were filled with silent, cruel judgment. He could feel their eyes lingering on him longer than necessary, their words cutting sharper than any blade. He tried to ignore them, tried to convince himself that only the forest and his gold mattered. But whispers have a way of burrowing into the mind, carrying doubt and feeding fear. Then came loss. Someone he loved, someone who had once cared for him, even in the shadow of his growing isolation, fell ill. The illness was sudden, merciless, and desperate. The treatment, the cure, the help that could have saved them, it was all within reach of the treasure he had buried. But he hesitated. The gold, locked beneath the forest floor, demanded secrecy. His fear of loss, of betrayal, of being robbed, held him back. He could not bring himself to risk trust, to expose what he valued most. By the time he acted, it was too late. The person was gone. The grief tore through him like wildfire, consuming every corner of his heart. And in the silence that followed, he realized something unbearable. Wealth had cost him more than he could ever measure. It had cost him love, connection, and the fragile warmth of human care. He returned to the forest again and again, but the earth gave nothing back. The place where his gold slept quietly beneath the soil now felt heavy with accusation. Roots seemed tighter, shadows longer, wind colder. Every tree, every leaf, seemed to mock the choices he had made, reminding him that he had chosen gold over life. The man's pride, once so carefully constructed, began to crumble. Loneliness had already hollowed out much of his joy, but grief carved deeper. He wandered through his home, now filled with the cold comfort of wealth, and realized it meant nothing. The rooms were empty. The coins gleamed, but they offered no warmth, no comfort, no answers. Only regret. Even the whispers from the village could not match the voice of the forest in his mind. He remembered every warning, every tale, every story of consequences hidden beneath the trees. Now he understood the weight of those stories. The forest did not forgive. The earth did not forget. And those who buried their desires in greed would pay the price in silence and sorrow. Each night, as he lay awake listening to the wind through his windows, he saw visions of what could have been: laughter, hands held, smiles exchanged, moments of connection stolen by fear, swallowed by his obsession with gold. And each vision brought a fresh pang of grief, a reminder that some losses could never be recovered. The man began to realize a terrifying truth: the forest had not only witnessed his greed, it had absorbed it. It had learned from it. And now, in every shadow, in every rustle of leaves, he felt its memory pressing upon him. He could hide nothing. Not from the trees, not from himself. For the first time, he understood that gold could not protect him. Gold could only measure the cost of fear, and in that calculation, he had lost far more than he had ever gained. The forest had made him see it. And he would never forget. Desperation, not courage, led him back to the forest. The gold he had buried so long ago, the very thing he had thought would bring safety, now seemed like the only way to reclaim what he had lost. But even as he stepped toward the trees, a heaviness pressed on his chest. The forest had changed, or perhaps he had changed, and the forest had simply grown larger in his mind, a living mirror of his fear and regret. The path he had walked countless times now felt strange. Familiar markers were gone. Branches blocked trails that had once been clear. Shadows stretched and bent in ways that made him pause, uncertain of what was real. The wind carried whispers he could not fully understand, voices mingling with memory, doubt, and longing. Every step into the forest felt like a step deeper into himself, a confrontation with choices long buried and consequences long avoided. He stumbled over roots that seemed to reach for him, pulling him closer to the earth. Leaves fell in silence, but each landing sounded like a footstep in the distance, echoing through the stillness. The forest, patient and unyielding, watched him approach its heart. He was alone, yet he felt surrounded, observed, measured. It was no longer just a place, it was a living witness to everything he had done and everything he had refused to do. Memories of the gold tangled with memories of loss. Faces of those he had turned away haunted him, the one who had needed help, the friends whose trust he had spurned, the family who had waited for a sign of affection he never gave. Each step forward forced him to carry the weight of their absence, as if the forest itself had pressed their grief upon him, intertwining it with the earth and roots beneath his feet. The deeper he went, the more the forest resisted. The clearing where he had buried the gold seemed to shift, hidden among new growth and fallen branches. Landmarks had faded, erased by time or perhaps by the forest's own memory. It was as if the trees remembered his fear and would not allow him an easy path to reclaim what he had once thought secure. Sweat ran down his brow, mixing with dirt and the sting of fatigue. He paused, breathing heavily, and looked around. The forest loomed above him in silent judgment. And in that silence, he realized that this journey was about more than the gold. It was about facing the truth he had avoided for so long, that his fear, his greed, and his refusal to trust had trapped him in a life of sorrow and isolation. Yet he pressed on. Each step, though uncertain, carried determination. He would confront what he had buried, whatever the forest allowed. And in that determination, there was a strange clarity. This was no longer just a quest for wealth, but a journey into the heart of his own mistakes. The forest, as ever, watched. And though the trees offered no guidance, no answers, no mercy, he felt their presence pressing him onward. It was time to see what the earth would give back, and what it would refuse. He found the clearing at last, or thought he did. The place where he had buried his gold all those years ago now seemed smaller, yet heavier. The air hung thick and still, as if holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do. He knelt on the ground, hands trembling, and began to dig. The soil was stubborn. It clung to the edges of the hole, refusing to give way. Each shovelful was harder to lift than the last, as if the earth itself knew the secret he carried and would not release it easily. He dug deeper, hour after hour, muscles straining, back aching, heart pounding. Sweat stung his eyes, but he did not stop. He could not stop. Finally, he reached the place where the gold should have been. His hands tore at the dirt, hoping, fearing, praying. But when he reached inside, he felt emptiness. The bundle was gone, or perhaps it had never been what he thought it was. Coins had crumbled, their shine faded to dull fragments. Cloth that had wrapped them had rotted into dust. Even the marks he had left to remember the spot seemed to have vanished, swallowed by time, roots, and memory. He sank to his knees, the truth hitting him like a hammer. The gold, the thing he had trusted more than love, more than kindness, more than life itself, was gone, or altered beyond recognition. The earth had refused to give back what he had buried with fear in his heart. And in that refusal, he saw something even more devastating. It was not the gold alone that was lost. It was trust. It was hope. It was the chance to be connected to others. The forest had remembered his fear, his obsession, his desire to control what could never be fully controlled. And now it reflected it back at him, unyielding, silent, eternal. He pressed his palms to the ground, shaking, breathing ragged. The forest loomed above him, its shadows long and still. The rustle of leaves sounded like judgment. For the first time, he felt the weight of every choice he had made, the doors he had closed, the hands he had turned away, the moments of love he had denied in favor of gold. The treasure he had sought to protect had become a mirror, showing him all that he had lost. Tears mixed with dirt on his face as he realized the forest had not taken the gold, it had only kept the memory of his intent. The earth remembered his greed, his fear, his refusal to trust, and in that memory, it held him accountable. It was a reckoning far greater than the loss of coins. It was a reckoning of the soul. He sat in the clearing, surrounded by trees that had silently watched his life unfold, and understood at last, he had buried more than gold. He had buried himself. His fear, his pride, his desire for control, all buried deep beneath the roots, twisting in darkness, growing into something far heavier than mere treasure. And the earth would not return it. In the silence that followed, he felt something shift inside him. Pain and grief were there, yes, but also clarity. The gold had never been the prize. It had been the lesson. The forest had waited patiently, as it always did, for the moment he would see it, not as wealth to claim, but as truth to face. The man looked up at the canopy, leaves trembling in a gentle wind. He understood, finally, that he had been seeking outside himself what could only be found within. The forest had given him nothing he wanted, but it had given him everything he needed. The man sat in a clearing, the weight of the forest pressing down around him, the wind whispering through the branches as if carrying voices from years long past. For the first time, he allowed himself to be still. He no longer dug. He no longer demanded. He simply listened, and in that listening, he began to understand. All his life, he had believed that gold could protect him. That it could shield him from betrayal, from loss, from fear itself. But now, beneath the roots and soil, he saw the truth. Gold had never been protection, it had been a barrier. Every coin buried, every secret hoarded, every refusal to trust had built walls around his heart. Walls taller than any tree, thicker than any trunk, impenetrable to kindness or love. The forest became a mirror of his own soul. The earth had swallowed more than treasure, it had absorbed his fears, his pride, his need for control. And like roots twisting deep beneath the soil, those buried emotions had grown into something dark and tangled, choking the life that might have flourished if he had opened himself to others. For the first time, he allowed regret to speak, not just the sharp, biting regret of what was lost, but the quiet, aching regret of what he had never allowed himself to have. The laughter of friends he had ignored, the hands he had refused to hold, the love he had hidden from, all these treasures had been swallowed by fear long before he had buried the gold. And yet, in this understanding, there was a strange relief. For the first time, he saw that his suffering had not come from the forest, nor from the loss of his treasure, nor from fate itself. It had come from the choices he had made, choices born of fear, choices that he could finally face and, perhaps, begin to undo. He pressed his hands against the earth once more, feeling the cold, damp soil beneath his palms. He realized that the forest had not punished him, it had held him accountable. It had reflected his own actions back to him, patiently, endlessly, until he could see them for what they truly were. The gold was gone, but the lesson remained, and it was heavier, deeper, and more lasting than any coin could ever be. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and he imagined them nodding, silently acknowledging his awakening. The forest, which had watched generations rise and fall, had witnessed his reckoning. And though it offered no words, no comfort, no applause, it had given him clarity. He understood now that the treasure he had sought was never gold. It had always been trust. It had always been love. It had always been the courage to open his heart and risk loss, the willingness to give without guarantee, the choice to live fully rather than merely protect what he thought he needed. A strange lightness filled him as he rose to his feet. The forest no longer seemed hostile, nor the shadows threatening. It was simply alive, as it had always been, reflecting the life that surged within him and the life he could yet share with the world. The truth beneath the roots was simple, yet profound. What is buried in fear grows twisted and dark, but what is nurtured in courage and love can flourish beyond measure. And for the first time in many years, he felt the stirring of hope, quiet and steady, taking root where once only fear had grown. The man returned to the village a different person. The steps that had once been measured by caution and suspicion were now guided by humility. His hands, once clenched around wealth, were open. His eyes, once wary and cold, were softer, searching for connection rather than guarding against betrayal. At first, the villagers were cautious. They remembered the man who had trusted nothing but coins, the man who had turned away friends and family when they sought his help. Some whispered, wondering if he had truly changed, or if this was another trick of fear. But he moved among them with quiet patience, offering help without expectation, listening without judgment, and speaking only when words were necessary. He could not undo the past. He could not bring back those he had lost or repair every broken relationship. But he could try. And in that trying, he found something he had never known before, relief in giving, warmth in connection, and a peace that no treasure could ever provide. He spent days helping those in need, lending hands where they were heavy, mending fences, carrying water, sharing meals. The gold that had once defined him was no longer his measure. Instead, he measured his worth in kindness, in care, in the courage to face others without fear. Slowly, the villagers began to notice. Walls that had been built against him softened. Smiles returned. Conversations flowed without suspicion. Even the forest, which had seemed so menacing in the past, became a quiet presence in his thoughts, a teacher rather than a judge. Its memory remained, yes, but it no longer felt threatening. The lessons he had learned beneath its canopy guided him now, not with punishment, but with clarity. He understood that redemption was not about recovering what was lost, nor about reclaiming gold. Redemption was about choosing differently, living differently, and allowing love to enter spaces fear had once claimed. He visited the edge of the forest often, not to dig, not to search, but to feel its presence and remember the truth it had revealed. He recalled the emptiness of the gold he had buried, the loss that had come from hoarding and hiding, and the heavy chains of his own making. And each time he returned home, he carried something far more valuable than coins: understanding, humility, and a heart that had begun to open again. Even the whispers of the villagers changed. Where suspicion had once lingered, curiosity now mingled with respect. Where envy had once grown, admiration quietly took root, not for his wealth, but for his willingness to face his past, to shoulder responsibility, and to transform himself. The man learned that life is measured not by what one keeps, but by what one gives. Not by gold buried in secret, but by moments shared in honesty, by hands held in support, by the courage to be vulnerable. The forest had taught him that lesson, and the village now reflected it back. And in this slow, steady journey toward redemption, he discovered the truth he had never known: gold cannot buy love, nor trust, nor forgiveness. These are earned in ways far more difficult, yet far more rewarding. And when a heart opens after years of fear, it creates a wealth that no earth or forest could ever hold. The man walked among his people with a quiet smile. He no longer measured his life by what he possessed, but by what he gave. And in that giving, he found a freedom and peace that had eluded him all those years buried beneath roots and shadows. Redemption, he realized, had never been about gold. It had always been about opening his heart, and finally, he had learned how. The forest stood as it always had, silent, patient, eternal. Its trees stretched toward the sky, roots twisting deep into the earth, holding stories older than any living soul. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, scattering patterns of light and shadow across the forest floor. To the casual passerby, it was nothing more than a stretch of wilderness. But those who had seen it with the eyes of the heart knew better. The forest remembered. It remembered the man who had come seeking safety in gold, the hands that had buried it deep beneath the soil, the fear and greed that had driven every choice. It remembered his solitude, his obsession, and the loss that had finally opened his heart. And though the coins had long vanished, and the earth had returned nothing, the memory of all that had been, and all that he had learned, remained alive, woven into the roots, whispered through the leaves. Generations would come and go. Children would run through the undergrowth, unaware of what lay beneath their feet. Hunters and travelers would follow the paths, oblivious to the lessons hidden in shadows and soil. Yet the forest would never forget. Every buried secret, every act of greed, every choice to open or close one's heart, remained written in the silent language of the land. For the man, the forest became a quiet companion, no longer a judge, but a mirror of truth. He carried the lessons he had learned into his days, sharing kindness where he once hoarded suspicion, offering love where he had once turned away. He knew that true wealth was never in gold, but in connection, in forgiveness, and in the courage to live openly. And so the forest watched, as it always had, as it always would, an eternal witness to human ambition and folly, hope and redemption. It remembered not the gold itself, but the intent behind it. It remembered the choices, the fears, and the heart that had finally learned to give. Beneath its canopy, life continued, silent, patient, eternal. The forest still remembered, and in that remembrance lay a quiet truth: what we bury in fear will shape us, what we nurture in love will endure, and the echoes of our actions will never fade, no matter how deeply they are hidden. The trees stood tall. The wind whispered. And the forest remembered, always.